Now, as we're releasing this, Easter is in 2 weeks' time, 3 Sundays, including this one. And so we're just kind of leaning into that, gearing up, preparing our hearts, and doing a little bit of a run-up, sort of a series, if you like, but we haven't called it that. Anyway, I'm actually speaking today a message where we're asking the question, does God have compassion for you? Well, hey there, Elevate friends and family. Great to have you with us today as we are just a few weeks away from the Easter weekend, which for people who are Jesus followers all around the world is a significant time. Now, this week, let me just give you a little bit of insight into one thread of my week so far. Monday morning, I woke up. When I got around to checking my phone, I found 3 text messages from numbers that I didn't recognize. The first one was someone telling me that I had to give them my address details or confirm my address details for a delivery, even though I haven't actually ordered anything. The second one was to inform me that I had to pay an extra amount for a delivery. Again, I hadn't ordered anything. And the third one was to let me know that my road toll payment was overdue, which is kind of weird because I live in Perth, and here in Perth, we don't have any tolls. Anyway, that was Monday. I had another of these same type of messages Tuesday. Having blocked all of the people the numbers from the day before, okay, fine. Wednesday, I had an email from somebody letting me know that I could be the worthy recipient of their late husband's piano if I just provide them my address details and they'll organize to have it sent to me. Firstly, I don't play piano. Secondly, I get that email pretty often, and I wonder if you may have done the same. Last week, my wife, late in the week, said to me that she had been frozen out of her Facebook account. And turns out that, yes, her account had been hacked, and she tried on multiple occasions to get back in, couldn't get in, and Facebook froze her out for 24 hours. And Louisa asked me, like, why would somebody try to hack my Facebook account? And I'm like, okay, it's because they're trying to get pieces of your digital life. This is not a new thing. In fact, it's been going on for quite some time. Some of you may have received an email sometime in the last 20 years from a Nigerian prince, or the wife of a late Nigerian prince, just wanting you to give them your bank account details and they'll transfer significant amounts of money. Well, if you've ever got one of those emails and you didn't reply, you might regret that, because check this out. The Canadian television network in Edmonton have reported that there's $43 million in cash found in an empty Nigerian apartment, to which somebody commented, poor guy probably spent the past decade trying to share it, but no one ever replied to his email. Okay. But this is a thing. It's actually a growing global issue, this issue of identity theft. Some sources suggest it's now the #1 crime in the world. Don't quote me on that, but it's certainly a big deal. In fact, just this week, an event took place in London called the Global Fraud Summit, a ministerial level gathering from countries all around the world, recognizing and needing to address this issue. And with identity theft, the challenge isn't just protecting what you have, wanting to make sure they don't clean out your bank accounts and so on, but it's also trying to protect who you are, stealing your identity, because what's become apparent is that if and when you have your identity stolen digitally, It is very, very, very complicated to get it back. And in fact, some people still experience the aftermath for years after their identity was stolen. So we're thinking about God's identity and whether or not over the years that's been stolen. So let's play a little thought experiment. If I was to ask you give me 5 words, just 5 words that you would use to describe God's identity, his nature, his character. What would those 5 words be? Now, maybe in a positive sense, you might say, God is love. Okay, sure, yeah, I get it. That's the Bible college answer. That's the answer that's going to get you the prize in Elevate Kids. But you're going to find some people, even Jesus followers, who might use different words to describe God's identity. God's angry. God's disappointed. So rather than you and I kind of hypothesize and kind of guess God's identity, I thought we'd just take a moment to go to the source and have a look at 5 words that God uses to describe himself. Now, if you've got your smartphone camera, how about you grab that and scan this flow code? It's going to take you right back early in the Bible, the second book, the book of Exodus. It's going to take you to chapter 34. And in this particular slice, God describes his identity for himself. And here's how God actually describes himself. The Lord, the God of compassion and mercy, I am slow to anger and filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. So here's your next book idea. If you're looking forward to writing your next book, here's one. Write the book called God in His Own Words. In fact, this particular description that God uses of himself, first announced to Moses, recorded in the book of Exodus, is actually repeated and referenced back to over 20 times throughout the remainder of the Bible. It's almost like God saying, listen, in case you missed it, this is so important, I'm going to keep coming back to it. I'm going to keep double clicking on it. I want you to know that my very nature, the very essence of my character, my identity can be found in these 5 characteristics. And look, I look at that list and I'm like, God, if that's true and you're not gaslighting us, I mean, that is super attractive. In fact, when I look at that list, I'm like, I'll take just one of them. I mean, sign me up for God's faithfulness. That'll do. But God's like, yeah, but look at all of this landscape describing my nature and character. So what I want to do today, next week, and then landing on Easter Sunday is just take a deeper dive into a few of these 5 characteristics that God uses to describe himself. Starting today with the one that God used first, that he is a God of compassion. Now, this English word compassion has the same root word in the original language as the word womb, like a female's womb. And really God's trying to establish that, like a mother, he is fiercely protective and defensive of the object of his love, which is you and me. Just this week, I heard this incredible story. It goes back quite a number of years. Group of friends playing a pickup basketball game, just an outdoor court, concrete base. And there was two brothers playing, an older brother, slightly younger brother, and they were on opposite teams in this pickup game. And the older brother was kind of just constantly trash talking the younger brother, pretty much stepping over the line a lot of the time. But the game was going on, and then suddenly the younger brother just kind of froze, and his eyes sort of started to roll back in his head, and then he kind of just slumped and fell to the ground. Turns out he was having an epileptic seizure. And the older brother immediately moved towards the younger brother and got down and cradled his head and stopped his head from hitting the concrete court. And then just held his head for a time. And the seizure kind of stopped, and the older brother looked up to the players who at this point were just sort of gathered around, as none of them had seen an epileptic seizure play out before, and said to them, listen, in a few moments, my brother's going to come to, and he's not kind of remember what happened here. And I just think, like, maybe it'd be better if you weren't all standing around staring at him. So, hey, can I ask you to maybe just go to the other end of the court and just start shooting around, and that way my brother won't be embarrassed when he comes to. And this is a somewhat imperfect picture, but this kind of action gives us a glimpse into compassion, that it's more than a feeling, that it's very much something that plays out in action. And I'm going to keep hitting that, but we're asking the question, does God have compassion for you? And maybe it's even a question you've asked yourself. Maybe not in those exact same words, maybe those, but you'd be like, does God care about me? Has God got my number? Is God indifferent towards me? I'm going through this thing. Has God even noticed that I'm? And I want to assure you, as best I can today, that God absolutely has compassion for you. Now, for some of you, if you're church veterans, you're like, yeah, I know. God's got compassion for me. Yay, God, thanks. But let's drill into it, because I think no matter how true that's been or how much you think you know that, there's more that God wants to bring out around this big idea that he has compassion for you, that you, as the object of his affection, he is fiercely protective of you. He speaks through a prophet. Sometime later, a prophet named Isaiah, and declares this: can a woman forget her nursing child, that she would have no compassion on the son of her womb? So this metaphor of a mother and the child of her womb, and it being tied to compassion, God plays it out again. No, even these, like anyone else, might forget, yet I will not forget you. Now, those of you who are moms, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is when your baby's like, maybe 4 months old, and they're a little bit hungry, they don't say to themselves, yeah, I'm hungry, but, well, it's 2 a.m. and, Mum's a bit tired. I've noticed a bit tired lately. So, look, I think I'm going to skip this meal and let her sleep. I mean, I've read about this thing called intermittent fasting, so maybe this is my time to give that a shot. And, I'll endure the hunger pangs until Mum's ready to get up and then come feed me. Yeah, no, pretty sure that's not how this works. No, in fact, when Junior is screaming out, when Junior needs his or her mom, even if it's 2 a.m., even if you're deathly tired. Moms, loving moms will get up, will sacrifice themselves out of compassion for the baby. And then when they walk in, they don't walk in saying, listen, Junior, all you've done all day is pee and poop and sleep and eat. What makes you think you've done anything to deserve me getting up and coming to you and providing you with this meal? No, mums, fueled by compassion, do what they do towards the object of their affection. In fact, what this metaphor or what this example demonstrates for us is that actually God's compassion towards us isn't even predicated on whether or not we deserve it based on what we have or haven't done, but it's actually predicated on how much He values us and wants to demonstrate His compassion towards us. Now, he kind of mixes the metaphor here, or maybe expands the metaphor here. The psalmist records this: as a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear Him. Fear Him means worship Him, revere Him. You know, like you're at your kid's sports game and they miss that goal that could have won the game for the team. On the way home, you pull over for an ice cream with your kid and you just assure them of how valuable they are. Maybe your daughter didn't get the grades that she worked so hard for and maybe missed out on a short-term opportunity, and yet you sit her down over a meal and just assure her that she is incredibly valuable and that this score on the test doesn't change that. Maybe you get the call from your 21-year-old that they've just crashed the car and your first question is, are you okay? This is just some imperfect examples of how God and why God demonstrates His compassion towards us. It's not based on what we've done. It's not based on what we deserve. It's based on the value, the inherent value that He holds for you. Now, there's a story, pretty famous story that Jesus told that exemplifies the compassion of a father. It's called the story of the prodigal son. It's kind of that phrase, prodigal son's, kind of made its way into our everyday vernacular. But the way Jesus tells it is there's a father and the father has two sons. The younger of the two sons kind of rudely, disrespectfully says to his father, "Can you give me my share of the inheritance now? I know you're still alive." But for whatever reason, the father, who seemingly was quite wealthy, gave the younger son his share of the inheritance. And well, the youngest son went off and blew it all. Blew it all on partying like it's 1999. And in fact, got so desperate that he started eating the food that was intended for the pigs, which for a Jewish person would have just been an absolute non-starter, regardless of your circumstances. Jesus says that at some point, like the younger son was at the end of his rope and he came to his senses. And he's like, my father's servants actually eat better than what I'm eating now. So I know what I'll do. I'm going to go back to my father. And then Junior rehearsed this speech. You know, I'm not worthy to be called your son. Make me your slave. And so he heads back home in desperation. Now, his father happened to see him in the distance as he was making his way back home. And his father started running towards him. Now remember, Junior had squandered all of his inheritance, Probably sullied the family reputation. You know, oh, that's the son of such and such. Ooh, have you seen what he's been doing lately? And so his dad starts running towards him. You might think that this is the cue for Junior to turn around and start running away in case Dad catches him. Like, I've heard about what you've been doing. Yet it would seem that Junior knew something about the nature and character of his father, that instead of running from his dad, who was sprinting towards him, Junior kept moving with his rehearsed speech playing over, ready to give it to his dad. And I don't want you to miss the significance of the father running to the son. In that culture, Jewish men, it was undignified to run. You just didn't do it in public. It was beneath you, particularly people who were wealthy. It was considered beneath you, and yet the father just disregarded that, disregarded his own reputation, disregarded what people thought of him, and ran towards his son. And Jesus said, filled with love and compassion. This was the fuel. This was the motivation. He ran to his son. It didn't scold him. Didn't remonstrate with him. No, embraced him and kissed him, and then ultimately welcomed him home and celebrated that he was back. Again, I want to say, God's compassion towards you and me isn't based on what we deserve. It's based on the value he has for us. So there's the big idea of today. God has compassion for you. And I hope I've done enough to just nudge you closer to believing that, to be encouraged by that, maybe be kind of reinvigorated by that if you've maybe been disappointed or doubting. Then there's just one more thing I want to land with. And it's this idea that because God has compassion for us, we should show compassion for others. I'm not going to spend long on this point, but really it comes from a big idea that all of the things that are hallmarks of God's nature and character, his identity, are not only things that we can confidently open ourselves up to and depend on and rely on, they're also things that God calls us as Jesus followers to demonstrate and pass on to others. And this is highlighted by another story that Jesus told. And it's another story that's actually entered our modern day vernacular, the prodigal son, and this one, the Good Samaritan. So Jesus had been confronted by an expert in the Jewish law and said, which is the greatest of the commandments? It's kind of saying it to trip Jesus up. I mean, there was 613 commandments at the time. Like, hey, Jesus, pick the top one. And Jesus did. He said, look, it's actually this. It's love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. And then he put another one like alongside it and says, and then also love your neighbor as you love yourself. And the Jewish religious experts like, okay, who's my neighbor? Well, Jesus answered that question with a story. And he talked about a Jewish man who was on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. And he got mugged, beaten up. The perpetrators took his money, took his clothing, and kind of left him by the side of the road, come what may. Jesus said that a priest came past, and like the audience would have been like, oh, good, a priest to the rescue. The priests are like right up here. And Jesus said, and the priest saw the man and crossed to the other side of the road and kept on walking. Now, that would have been a head scratcher, this idea that, well, okay, all right, we'll give the priest a free kick. He's obviously got very important things to do. And then Jesus said, well, okay, then a Levite came by. It's like, we're not quite a priest, but definitely up there. And the audience would be like, all right, the Levite, the Jewish Levites here to save the day. The priest didn't, got important things to do. Well, Jesus said that the Levite also kind of pretended not to see the man and crossed the other side of the road and kept going. It's like, well, that's disappointing. The man's still lying there. And then Jesus said a third man came by, a Samaritan man. Now, a Samaritan man means someone from the area of Samaria. People from Samaria, the Jewish people, not only were they sort of like mortal enemies, the Jewish people considered people from Samaria, they didn't even think of them as humans. Like they thought of them as like a lesser species. And so this guy from Samaria enters the scene. And I wonder if Jesus' audience were thinking like, oh, all right, here we go. This Samaritan's going to come. He's going to finish him off. Got any money left? Is there any other things I can plunder? I'll just maybe I'll just kill you because you're Jewish and we hate each other. They wouldn't have called him Good Samaritan. Those two words were never used in the same sentence by Jewish people. So this is how Jesus' story played out. Then a despised Samaritan, not a good Samaritan, came along. And when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Now, when Jesus used this version of the word we now translate as compassion, the only other times this version of the word are used are when they're used to describe when Jesus felt compassion towards people. And what you see when you read the biographies of Jesus is that whenever Jesus felt compassion, he was moved to do something. There was always an action that followed. And so, unsurprisingly, Jesus described this Samaritan as feeling the same compassion that Jesus feels in these types of situations. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he took care of him. And the next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man, and if his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here. Here's an example of this idea that not only does God have compassion for us, that because God has compassion for us, he calls us to have and demonstrate compassion for other people. So I just want to put this out there if this is something you're not yet in the habit of doing. Pray for opportunities. And don't just pray for opportunities, pray for an awareness. Because sometimes opportunities can come and we'll maybe miss them or not see them or not fully appreciate the significance of them. And then pray for the strength and the courage to act in compassion towards those people. Hey, listen, next week I'm going to keep going with these God in his own words descriptions. And I'm asking the question next week, is God angry with you? Maybe that's something you've asked. Well, we'll give that a crack next week. We'll see you then.